It's a peculiar truth of my profession that data, cold and hard on the page, can sometimes reveal more about the human heart than 1,000 poetic descriptions. A recent global survey on desired culinary experiences landed on my desk, and its findings were a quiet thunderclap. 15 countries, thousands of respondents, one clear winner for the most sought-after food culture to experience, next, American. Not the fast food monoliths or the molecular gastronomy labs, but the sprawling, diverse, deeply personal tapestry of American regional cooking. From the time-honored traditions of a New England clam bake to the innovative fire of a California grill, the American food scene had evolved beyond mere sustenance. It had become an experience, a siren song to the rest of the world. The specifics were even more telling. The top desired experience? A visit to a classic American diner at 41.4%. Close behind was a farm-to-table meal in the countryside at 40%, followed by a cross-country trip on an Amtrak train at 37.3%. It was a portrait of a world yearning not for monuments, but for the genuine pulse of American life. They wanted the beautiful, the nuanced, the wholesome, but also the warm, the soulful, the food that sinks into your bones and tells you a story. There is a quiet power to American food that no other country quite possesses. Why this sudden, intense fascination? What was it about our tables that so captivated the global palate and spirit? To find the answer, a journalist was sent on a journey. The destination was this vast continent of a country. And what she found there was not just food, but a culture steeped in the very essence of life. Here, in our sun-drenched Soho editorial office for Global Palate magazine, the walls are a mosaic of the world's cuisines. Photographs from bustling Moroccan souks, serene Japanese temples, and rustic Italian farmhouses feel less like decorations and more like letters from distant friends. I am Amelia Bergner, 35 years old, a food journalist by trade, and a cultural nomad by nature. My passport is a litany of flavors: Italy, Spain, France, the Middle East, Africa, South America. To taste the lives and cultures of people at their tables is not just my job, it is the very fabric of my existence. Yet on my desk this afternoon, under the weight of a heavy, satisfying career, lay that report. And the headline was more arresting than any breaking news ticker. 15 Nations survey ranks USA one most desired culinary destination. Below it, the data was stark. Interest in American food culture registered at 73%. The runner-up, France, languished at 58%. The gap was staggering. I traced the bold print with my finger, a frown knitting my brow. The entire world was obsessed with America's culinary landscape, and yet, I, one of its premier chroniclers, had a gaping hole in my own map. More accurately, it was a chasm I had deliberately engineered. The reason was simple, primal, and deeply embarrassing for someone in my line of work. I have a visceral fear of raw oysters. This isn't mere pickiness. It is a deep-seated, psychological revulsion, rooted in a childhood memory I can't shake. My editor-in-chief, Klaus Becker, a stern man of 55 with an uncanny emotional intelligence, saw the look on my face and couldn't suppress a smirk. He ambled over to my desk, his presence filling the space, and tapped a finger on the report. "You see this, Amelia? You, the woman who has broken bread with everyone from Bedouin nomads to Andean shepherds, are actively avoiding the single hottest topic in our field. It's not good for the magazine, and frankly, it's not good for you." I swiveled in my chair to face the window, gazing out at the familiar, chaotic ballet of a New York City afternoon. The juxtaposition of historic cast-iron facades and gleaming glass towers was my daily reality. "Klaus, you know this," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "The day I willingly eat a raw oyster is the day the Hudson freezes over in July." My tone was light, but it couldn't mask the genuine anxiety thrumming just beneath the surface. Klaus placed a hand on my shoulder. Its warmth was a gentle, grounding pressure. "That's precisely why this is perfect," he said, his voice low and serious. "You've embraced everything. You found beauty in fermented shark in Iceland and ate witchetty grubs with Aboriginal elders in Australia. But the American oyster? That's your blind spot. Your I can't. Don't you see? Your I can't is the best story we've got. I turned back to him. His eyes, usually sharp with editorial critique, were filled with an unwavering belief. What will you feel when you finally face it? He continued, his voice compelling. What will you discover on the other side of that fear? That's what our readers want. Your most authentic reaction. A real transformation. That's the moment. Something clicked deep inside me, a sound like an old lock finally giving way. He was right. I was running. As a professional, I had no business walling off an entire, essential part of the very culture I was meant to document. When? I asked. The single word was a surrender, an acceptance, a commitment. Next month, Klaus said, a triumphant gleam in his eye. He returned to his desk and slid another document across to me. It was a clipping from a trade journal. Seattle's oyster bars achieve global recognition for unparalleled quality and variety. I took the paper. My personal phobia and my professional duty had just collided with the force of a head-on train. This wasn't just another assignment. It was a challenge, issued to the very core of who I was. Outside, a brisk autumn wind swirled through the canyons of Manhattan, rattling the window panes. I took a slow, deep breath. Next month, I would fly to the Pacific Northwest. What would I, a woman raised on the warm, cooked heart of Europe, find in the cold, raw heart of the American coast? The journey to find out was about to begin. I was born in Vienna, a city cradled by the Danube, a place of imperial ghosts and cozy coffee houses. But the landscape of my soul was shaped less by its Baroque architecture and more by my family's dinner table. My mother, a woman for whom cooking was a language of love, almost always had a pot of something warm simmering on the stove. Hungarian goulash was her specialty, a deep, paprika-rich stew of beef and onions that was the official scent of winter in our home. The steam and spice that billowed from the kitchen were the signal that our family was whole, that we were safe. Every dish that graced our table was hot. Wiener Schnitzel, crisp and golden from the pan. Creamy vegetable soups that warmed you from the inside out. Even our potato salad was served warm, dressed in a tangy vinegar broth. Warm food warms the family, my mother would say, and the phrase took root in my young heart. I came to believe that the temperature of food was the temperature of love. Cold food felt disconnected, lonely. It wasn't until I was much older that I realized this simple preference had curdled into a genuine phobia. When I was 10, my family took a holiday to a small fishing village on the Mediterranean coast. One evening, at a little taverna by the sea, my father, eager for me to experience true local flavor, ordered a platter of freshly caught seafood. I saw my first raw oyster. It sat there on a bed of ice, glistening, gray, and utterly alien. Its very appearance offended my young sensibilities, which knew only the comforting alchemy of heat and fire. It's a sign of freshness, my father explained, his voice full of encouragement. So beautiful, it doesn't even need to be cooked. But to my 10-year-old eyes, it wasn't beautiful. It was dangerous. Prodded by my parents, I forced a small piece into my mouth. The sensation that spread across my tongue was unlike anything I had ever known, a cold, slippery, briny shock. A few hours later, a fever took hold of me. The doctor called it a simple case of food poisoning, but in my child's mind, a different, more permanent diagnosis was made. Raw is dangerous. Cold is bad for you. Uncooked cannot be trusted. This conviction never faded. Now, at 35, in my own New York kitchen, I continue the Viennese tradition. Veal simmered in white wine, cheese fondue, warm potato salads. Even chilled soups rarely make an appearance on my table. Raw is out of the question. In my career, I've navigated many challenges. I've sampled prosciutto in Parma and tuna tartare in Spain, but always with a professional's detachment, a subtle holding of my breath. But American raw oysters were different. They came from this vast, adopted homeland of mine, and they were inextricably tied to that primal childhood fear. The psychological distance allowed the fear to remain absolute. As I prepared to leave my apartment for the trip, I called my mother in Vienna. "Mama, I'm going to Seattle." A delighted sound came through the phone. For her generation, America was still a land of grand, cinematic promise. "But darling," she added, her voice laced with concern, "aren't there many raw things there?" She knew my weakness well. I managed to laugh. "It's fine, Mama. I'm a professional." The words felt hollow even as I said them. My heart was aflutter with a nervous, hummingbird beat. Later that night, in the quiet of my bedroom, I unearthed a childhood diary. Tucked inside the faded notebook, in my own loopy, 10-year-old script, was a declaration written the day after the Mediterranean incident. I will never eat raw things again. 25 years later, that vow is still in effect. But now, Klaus's words echoed in my mind. Your "I can't" is the best story we've got. I had always strived to be the perfect journalist, believing that embracing every culture was the hallmark of professionalism. But in truth, I was operating with a massive blind spot, a part of the map I had willingly left blank. Perhaps this journey to the Pacific Northwest was my chance to finally fill it in. From the land of fire and stew to the land of ice and brine. From a woman who believed in warmth to one who might, just might, find something profound in the cold. The next morning, I packed my suitcase. My heavy wool coat for the damp Seattle chill, a few books on American culinary history I hadn't yet cracked open. I decided I would experience it first with my senses, not with my intellect. On the flight from JFK to Seattle-Tacoma, I watched the dense grid of New York City shrink below, eventually dissolving into a blanket of clouds. At that moment, I felt a stirring deep inside me. It wasn't quite fear anymore. It was the sound of a door to the unknown, creaking slowly open. The moment I stepped off the plane at Seattle-Tacoma, I felt I had arrived in a different country altogether. New York's airports are a symphony of managed chaos, a loud, polyglot scrum of humanity. But here, a sense of calm order prevailed. As I walked toward baggage claim, I was struck by a quiet efficiency. People moved with a purpose that felt unhurried. The loudest sounds were the gentle whir of suitcase wheels and the soft thud of footsteps on the polished floor. I found myself unconsciously softening my own stride. Before the trip, I'd watched videos of Seattle, the Space Needle, the waterfront, the bustling markets, but no video could capture this. It was the air itself. Something was different about the air, in this part of the country. I collected my luggage and navigated the pristine terminals toward the exit. The clear signage, the spotless floors, the neatly arranged information desks, it all felt like the result of someone's deep and abiding care. Waiting for the light rail to take me downtown, I stood with my suitcase and looked around. The late afternoon sky over Seattle felt vast and crystalline, a shade of blue purer than any I'd seen on the East Coast. And then, a familiar pang. I was hungry. I'd picked at the airline meal, another chilled affair on a plastic tray, but now my stomach craved something real, something with warmth and substance. The train ride into the city was a quiet glide through suburbs and industrial parks. After checking into my hotel, I felt a restless energy. I couldn't just sit here. I needed to walk, to feel the city's pulse. I wandered through the downtown streets as dusk began to settle, the air growing cool and tasting of salt from nearby Puget Sound. I passed glossy restaurants and sleek coffee shops, but none of them felt right. Then, tucked into a side street, I saw it. A small, brightly lit shop with a simple sign. Pike Place Deli. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt honest. Inside, the smell of smoked fish and fresh bread enveloped me. It was a tiny space, but impeccably clean. A young man with a friendly, open face stood behind the counter, meticulously arranging slices of salmon on a bagel. A sign scrawled on a chalkboard caught my eye. Classic lobster roll, New England style. It was a cold dish. My old instincts screamed no, but the experience on the flight, the quiet order of this new city, had opened a crack in my armor. It wasn't a raw oyster. It was a start. "One lobster roll, please," I said, my voice surprising me with its steadiness. The young man smiled, a genuine, welcoming smile. "Great choice. Best in the city." I watched him work, and I was mesmerized. It was a performance of quiet virtuosity. He took a brioche bun, split it down the top, and toasted the sides in a pan of sizzling butter until they were a perfect, crisp gold. He then took a stainless steel bowl filled with huge, glistening chunks of lobster meat, tossed it with just a touch of mayonnaise, celery, and a squeeze of lemon. There was no flourish, no dramatic flair, just an economy of motion that spoke of deep respect for the ingredients. He piled the cold lobster salad into the warm, buttery bun. It was a study in contrasts, a perfect balance. He handed it to me on a simple paper plate. I took it to a small counter by the window and took my first bite, and my eyes widened. The warmth of the toasted bun gave way to the cool, sweet tenderness of the lobster. The richness of the butter and mayo was cut by the bright acidity of the lemon and the clean, herbaceous crunch of the celery. It was cold, yes, but it wasn't the lonely, disconnected cold I had always associated with uncooked food. This was a vibrant, life-affirming cold. It didn't warm my body in the physical sense, like my mother's goulash, but it felt like it was warming my soul. The care, the balance, the perfect execution, it was a revelation. A cold dish could be an expression of love. I finished the roll, savoring every last bite. As I was leaving, I caught the eye of the young man behind the counter. He was watching me with a hopeful expression. "How is it?" he asked. "Incredible," I said, and the word felt inadequate. "Truly incredible." His face broke into a wide grin. "Welcome to Seattle," he said. "Hope you enjoy our food." That night, in my hotel room overlooking the city lights sparkling on the water, I opened my journal. I wrote, "Arrived in Seattle today. My first encounters were with silence, cleanliness, and an unexpected culinary revelation. I have always feared the cold and the raw, but that wasn't a rejection of this food culture itself. I was ignorant of the whole because I feared a single part. If a simple deli can operate with this much heart and precision, what other surprises await?" I put down my pen and gazed out the window at the unfamiliar skyline. The neon sign of the Pike Place Market glowed in the distance, a silent, steady beacon. And for the first time, I felt my heart being pulled toward it, not with dread, but with a thrilling, terrifying curiosity. The next morning, I left the hotel while the city was still draped in the deep blue of pre-dawn. My destination was that glowing sign, Pike Place Market. I'd been told that to understand the soul of Seattle's food scene, you had to see its heartbeat at dawn. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the unmistakable scent of brine and damp earth. As I approached, the quiet streets gave way to a rising hum of activity. Men in heavy boots and orange waiters hustled past, their voices calling out in the dark. I found a spot on a viewing balcony, overlooking the main floor. Below me, a scene of overwhelming vitality unfolded. Mountains of ice were being shoveled into displays. Crates of Dungeness crab, their legs still twitching, were stacked high, and laid out in neat, shimmering rows were the fish. Salmon of every shade, from pale pink to a deep, fiery ruby. Halibut, stark white and massive. It was a staggering sight. I had only ever known fish as meat fillets behind a glass counter. Here, they were not just products. They were creatures of the deep, their powerful lives laid bare. It was a display of life, a testament to the bounty of the cold, gray Pacific. There was a reverence here, and in that reverence, I felt a flicker of fear. Suddenly, a great shout went up. "Fish flyin'!" A fishmonger at the main stall picked up a huge, glistening salmon and with a theatrical underhand heave, sent it sailing through the air. Another fishmonger, positioned behind the counter, caught it expertly with a flourish. A cheer went up from the small crowd of early morning tourists. I had thought it was just a gimmick, but watching it unfold, I saw something else. It was a ritual. It was a display of skill, of teamwork, of a playful but deep respect for their work and for the creatures they handled. It was a sacred, boisterous ceremony, a daily communion between the city and the sea. After the sun had risen, casting long golden shafts of light through the market's high windows, I knew I could no longer delay. I had seen the ceremony. Now I had to take the sacrament. I walked through the market, the thick, primal smell of the sea filling my lungs, and found a small, unpretentious oyster bar tucked into a corner. Its sign was old and faded. Inside, there were just a few round stools at a worn marble counter. A man stood behind it, a shucker, his hands moving with a practiced, rhythmic grace. He wasn't just preparing food. He was a gatekeeper, unlocking treasures from the sea. His every movement, the precise insertion of the knife, the quick twist of the wrist, the gentle severing of the muscle, was filled with the same focused intensity as the men I'd watched throwing the salmon. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. The fear, dormant since that day in the Mediterranean, was back with a vengeance. But seeing the shucker's hands, seeing the respect etched into every line of his face, I felt another force pushing back against the fear. I had witnessed the entire process, from the market's dawn ritual to this man's careful hands. To turn back now would be an act of cowardice, a betrayal of the very story I had come here to find. I took a deep breath and slid onto a stool. The shucker looked up, his eyes a pale, clear blue like the winter sea. "First time?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He must have seen the terror on my face. I could only nod. He gave a slight, knowing smile. He picked up a small, deeply cupped oyster, its shell mottled with gray and purple. "Shigoku," he said. "From the bay. Clean and sweet. A good place to start." He worked his knife into the hinge, and with a soft pop, the shell opened. He cleaned the edge, set the oyster on a bed of crushed ice, and slid it in front of me. With it came a tiny fork and a small wedge of lemon. There it was. My monster. Glistening gray, alive. My whole body screamed at me to run. My childhood memory flared, a phantom taste of sickness on my tongue. I squeezed my eyes shut. I saw the fishmongers, laughing as a salmon flew through the air. I saw the shucker's hands, moving with the grace of a surgeon. This wasn't just a piece of flesh. It was a story. It was the story of the cold, clean water of Puget Sound, of the men who farmed it, of the market that celebrated it. I opened my eyes. I picked up the shell. My hand was shaking. I squeezed a drop of lemon onto the oyster, raised it to my lips, and tilted it back. The sensation was instantaneous and overwhelming. First, a rush of cold, clean brine, like swallowing a wave. It was the pure, unadulterated taste of the ocean. Then, the texture, not slimy, as I'd feared, but firm and silky, yielding with a slight chew. Finally, a delicate, lingering sweetness, a finish as clean and crisp as the Seattle air. Tears welled in my eyes. The man behind the counter watched me, his expression unreadable. I looked at him, unable to speak, and simply nodded. A slow smile spread across his face. "Welcome to the club," he said softly. I had crossed a threshold. And on the other side, I found not a monster, but a profound and beautiful truth. I found the heart of a place, offered up in a single, perfect bite. That evening, electrified by the experience at the market, I couldn't bear the thought of returning to the quiet solitude of my hotel. I needed noise, life, a place to process the day's monumental shift. My journey was taking me south next, into the fiery heart of American barbecue culture. I hailed a cab to the airport, a new, exhilarating sense of freedom coursing through me. A few hours later, I landed in Austin, Texas. The air that hit me as I stepped out of the terminal was not cool and briny, but warm, thick, and scented with blossoms and exhaust. I had the name of a legendary barbecue joint, a place on the outskirts of the city that was more institution than restaurant. When my rideshare dropped me off, I saw a line of people snaking out of a rustic, barn-like building and across a dusty parking lot. The air was heavy with the intoxicating perfume of slow-burning oak and rendering beef fat. This was a different kind of temple, and the line was its congregation of the faithful. After an hour's wait, I finally made it inside. The interior was a chaotic, joyous scene. Long communal picnic tables were packed with people from every walk of life. Laughter and loud conversation echoed off the corrugated tin walls. A young woman with a friendly Texas drawl took my order, guiding me through the sacred texts of the menu. You gotta get the brisket, Han, and the ribs. Oh, and a link of the jalapeno sausage. I ordered it all, and it was served unceremoniously on a sheet of brown butcher paper piled onto a red plastic tray. I found an empty spot at a crowded table. Across from me sat a group of men in plaid shirts, their conversation animated and friendly. They noticed my solo tray, my slightly bewildered expression, and immediately welcomed me into their fold. "First time?" one of them asked, his grin wide. I nodded, feeling a bit shy. "I'm from New York." "Well, all right," another boomed. "Get ready to have your life changed." He gestured to my tray. "Now, the secret to that brisket is the bark. See that dark, crusty bit? That's where all the flavor is." They show me how to tear off a piece of white bread to sop up the juices, insisted I try their favorite local craft beer, a Shiner Bock, and debated the finer points of rubs and smoking times. I took my first bite of the brisket. The bark was peppery and savory, and beneath it, the meat was so tender it dissolved on my tongue in a wave of smoky, beefy flavor. The pork rib, lacquered in a tangy sauce, fell clean from the bone. It was food that was loud, unapologetic, and deeply communal. It was the polar opposite of the delicate oyster I'd eaten that morning, but in its own way, it was just as profound. In Seattle, I'd had a solitary, introspective experience. Here, eating was a shared celebration. It was about liberation, about shedding the formalities of the day and connecting with friends and strangers over a shared meal. One of the men, a software engineer named Dave, looked at me as I savored a bite of sausage. "You know, the great thing about Texas barbecue," he said, leaning in, "is that it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. At this table, we're all just here for the meat. It brings folks together." They passed me a pitcher of beer. We raised our plastic cups. We didn't need words. The simple act of sharing this meal, this moment, created a bond. The smiles, the laughter, the food, it was a gentle invitation into the everyday life of this place. That night, after they'd all said their goodbyes and welcomed me to Texas like an old friend, I walked back to my hotel through the warm Austin night. This country was beginning to reveal its secrets to me, one plate at a time. In Seattle, it had whispered a story of the sea. Here, in Texas, it had sung a loud, joyful chorus of fire and fellowship. The next leg of my journey took me deeper into the American South, to a city that felt suspended in time, New Orleans. As the plane descended, I saw the mighty Mississippi River snaking its way through the lush, green landscape. From the moment I stepped into the humid, fragrant air of the French Quarter, I felt as though I had entered another world. The intricate iron lace of the balconies, the faint sound of jazz drifting from a hidden courtyard, the scent of sweet olive and savory spices. It was a sensory overload in the most wonderful way. My purpose here was to interview the head chef at one of the city's Grande Dame restaurants, a place steeped in Creole tradition. I checked into a historic hotel where the ceiling fans turned with a lazy grace and prepared for my dinner reservation. That evening, I was shown to a table in a magnificent dining room where waiters in crisp white jackets moved with a silent, practiced efficiency. My guide for the evening was not the chef, but the maitre d', an elegant, silver-haired Creole man named Antoine, whose family had worked in the restaurant for 3 generations. "Tonight," he said, his voice a soft, melodic baritone, "we will take you on a journey through the history of New Orleans." What followed was not merely a meal, it was a narrative served in courses. It was the gumbo, a dark, complex roux that Antoine explained was the pot of this city's history, French technique, Spanish spices, African okra, and Native American file. Each spoonful tasted of centuries of convergence. Then came the oysters Rockefeller, baked in a vibrant green sauce of herbs and butter, a cooked oyster, a gentle nod to my past fears, now transformed into something decadent and comforting. Antoine told me the recipe was a secret so closely guarded that the original creator took it to his grave. He spoke about the rhythm of the seasons, the importance of the holy trinity of onion, bell pepper, and celery as the foundation of their cuisine. He explained that each dish wasn't just a collection of ingredients, but a story passed down, a piece of cultural memory. In many places you eat food, Antoine said, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Here, you eat history. You eat time itself. The meal unfolded at an unhurried pace. Each course arrived at precisely the right moment, allowing time for reflection, for conversation. I realized this was the refinement I had been looking for, a different kind of precision from the Seattle oyster bar. It was the precision of tradition, of a culture that understood that the spaces between the notes are just as important as the notes themselves. In Vienna, a grand meal was about abundance, all the dishes arriving at once. Here, time was an ingredient, perhaps the most important one of all. I was tasting not just flavors, but the slow, patient passage of years. That night, my journal entry was simple. America is a country that eats not only with its mouth, but with its memory. In New Orleans, flavor has a lineage. For the final stop on my pilgrimage, I flew to the place that felt most alien of all, the vast, open heartland of Iowa. The view from the plane window was a mesmerizing, endless quilt of green and gold squares of farmland. This was the source, the quiet, fertile center from which so much of the nation's sustenance flowed. I had arranged to visit a small, family-run organic farm, a place that had been in the same family for over a century. As my rental car kicked up dust on the long gravel driveway, I saw an elderly woman waiting for me on the porch of a simple white farmhouse. This was Eleanor, the family matriarch, a woman in her 80s with hands gnarled by a lifetime of work and eyes as clear and blue as the enormous sky above us. Her smile was as warm and welcoming as the summer sun. There was no formal interview. Instead, she took me by the arm and led me through her fields. "Language gets complicated," she said with a chuckle. "Best to just let the land do the talking." We walked past rows of sweet corn, the tassels shimmering in the breeze. We picked sun-warmed tomatoes straight from the vine, their scent earthy and sweet. She showed me the chicken coop, the herb garden, the small pasture where a few dairy cows grazed peacefully. Her movements, though slowed by age, were filled with a deep, innate knowledge of the earth. We brought our harvest back to the farmhouse kitchen, a bright, spacious room that smelled of yeast and cinnamon. Together, we prepared a simple lunch, a roasted chicken, corn on the cob boiled for precisely 3 minutes, and a salad of sliced tomatoes drizzled with olive oil and sprinkled with salt. We sat at a large oak table, worn smooth by generations of family meals. Before we ate, Eleanor bowed her head. "We thank the good earth for this bounty," she said softly. "The sun for its warmth, the rain for its drink, and the hands that brought it to our table." It wasn't a formal prayer, but a simple, profound statement of fact. It was an acknowledgement of connection, of the intricate web of life that had culminated in this plate of food. We ate, and the flavors were revelatory in their purity. The chicken was succulent, the corn burst with sweetness, the tomatoes tasted of pure sunshine. It was more delicious than any elaborate dish I had ever eaten in a Michelin-starred restaurant. "You're tasting the truth," Eleanor said, noticing the look on my face. "Food tastes best when you know its story." As the journey neared its end, a new anxiety began to creep in. Back in the frantic energy of New York, would this all fade away? Would I revert to my old self? The experiences had been so profound, so deeply felt. I scrolled through the photos on my phone back in my hotel room on my last night in Iowa. It wasn't just a gallery of food. It was a collection of faces. The intense gaze of the Seattle oyster shucker, the broad, welcoming smiles of the men at the Texas barbecue joint, Antoine's refined, knowing grin in New Orleans, and Eleanor's gentle, sun-crinkled face in her Iowa kitchen. Every smile had transformed my journey from a simple food tour into a story of the human heart. I finally understood, in a way I never had before, that my fear had never been just about the food. Food and people were inextricably linked. Back in my New York apartment, surrounded by the familiar symphony of sirens and city hum, I sat and pieced it all together. The Shuckers' reverence in Seattle, the communal joy in Austin, the deep history in New Orleans, the pure connection to the land in Iowa. A single, unifying thread ran through it all. It wasn't a particular flavor or technique. It was an ethos. It was an unspoken gratitude. I opened my laptop and typed a few words into a search engine: American food philosophy grace. The results were varied, but one phrase, from an old farmer's almanac, stood out. It was simple: from the soil, to the hand, to the soul. I whispered the words aloud. From the soil, to the hand, to the soul. That was it. From Eleanor's farm, to the Shuckers' calloused hands, to the communal spirit that nourished not just the body, but the heart. It encompassed the reverence for the living thing, the gratitude for those who harvested, transported, and cooked it. I folded my hands in my lap, closed my eyes, and said it again, this time with feeling. In that moment, I thought of my mother's warm goulash in Vienna. That warmth was her love, made tangible. And in the same way, the cold oyster, the smoky brisket, the historic gumbo, they were all expressions of someone's heart, of someone's care. Warm or cold, rustic or refined, the contrast was superficial. The essence was the same, a deep respect for the act of giving and receiving life. The next morning, in the car to JFK, I watched the familiar city streetscape blur past my window. Before this journey, my heart had been full of apprehension, a fear of the raw and the unknown that had cast a shadow over my relationship with the food of my own adopted country. Now, that shadow was gone, replaced by a deep affection and a quiet sadness that it was over. At the check-in counter, I felt the change in me. It was a subtle shift in posture, a new sense of groundedness. Walking toward the gate, I pulled out the small notebook I carried with me. On the first page, I saw the words I'd written on my first night in Seattle: perhaps I will never truly love what is raw. I smiled, a slow, genuine smile. Below it, I wrote a new sentence, the pen moving with a firm, gentle pressure. To eat is to understand a place, its people, and its history. It is not just a taste. When the heart is open, you can finally, truly meet your food. As I stepped onto the plane, I silently repeated the phrase that had become my mantra: from the soil, to the hand, to the soul. It was a quiet hymn of thanks and respect. As the plane climbed, I watched the American landscape recede until it was lost in the clouds. This country had changed me. Not just because I had tried new things, but because it had fundamentally altered the way I moved through the world. The first thing I did when I returned to New York was invite my friends over for dinner. On the table, I laid out dishes made with ingredients I'd had shipped from the places I visited. Brisket I'd smoked myself on my small balcony, a simple tomato salad with herbs, and a rich gumbo I'd spent all day perfecting. The apartment filled with aromas and laughter. "This is incredible, Emmy," a friend said, her eyes wide. "I feel like I've just taken a trip across the country." Food, I thought, is how stories travel. From person to person, from coast to heartland, transcending everything. Soon after, I gave a talk at a local cultural center. The theme, of course, was America. I used to avoid much of this country's food. I began, my voice steady. I was afraid because I didn't understand it. But when I finally dove in, what I found was a culture that extends far beyond taste. From the soil, to the hand, to the soul. That simple idea contains a reverence for life, a gratitude for people, and a deep connection to the earth. The moment I understood that eating is never just about nutrition. The room filled with warm, sustained applause. My article, "My Fear of Oysters and Finding the Soul of the American Table," was published as the magazine's feature story. The response was overwhelming. My social media flooded with comments from all over the world. I used to hate grits, but after reading your story, I went to Charleston and now I understand. The way you wrote about Texas barbecue is how I feel about my family's Sunday roast in England. It connects us. That phrase, from the soil, to the hand, to the soul. I am so moved. In my country, we have a similar idea, but I had forgotten its importance. Reading through the comments, I saw a universal theme. The reason people were so drawn to American food culture wasn't just its deliciousness. It was because, through its vast diversity, they could touch something essential about life. The artisan skill of a Seattle oyster shucker, the democratic joy of a Texas barbecue pit, the deep-rooted history of a New Orleans gumbo, the stark simplicity of an Iowa tomato, and even the meticulous care in a perfectly wrapped deli sandwich. They were all different, yet they all shared a common spirit, an insistence on freshness, a dedication to craft, and a heartfelt desire to provide the very best for someone else. The shucker, the pitmaster, the maitre d', the farmer, they were all sending the same message. We value you, so we offer you our best. This intention transcended language and resonated in hearts around the world. In my article, I added a final passage. Why has American food captured the world's imagination? It is not just about aesthetics or technique. It is an attitude that values life itself through the act of eating. It is a promise of honesty, of craftsmanship, and of the simple, powerful desire to make something good for someone else. The world feels that consistent spirit. And it reminds us that the meals we often take for granted, a bowl of soup, a simple salad, a sandwich bought at a train station, can be cultural treasures, moments capable of changing a life. It is something we should all be proud of. From my apartment window, I can see the East River, its surface glittering under the winter sky. Snow is beginning to fall, dusting the city in a soft white blanket. I pick up a simple ceramic bowl, a souvenir from my trip. I fill it with a savory chicken soup, its steam rising in a fragrant cloud. For me, now, this aroma is more beautiful than any perfume in the world. From the soil, to the hand, to the soul, I murmur. The words feel natural on my tongue now. The woman who was once afraid of a raw oyster can now sit at any table, in any country, and feel the human heart beating behind the food. Every table is a culture. Every bite is a story. And I, finally, am ready to hear them all. I smile, a quiet, peaceful smile, and take the first spoonful.